Jason is a data scientist, entrepreneur, thought leader in the field of synthetic data. He is the founder and CEO of Simulacra Synthetic Data Studio, and there he's at the forefront of innovation solutions for complex data challenges. Previous to this, Jason was the founder and CEO of Gastrograph AI, which was a company focused on R&D and building a SaaS enterprise software that was used by Fortune 100 companies in the area of flavor and taste. Jason has expertise in sensory science, machine learning, and small sample sizes, as well as topological data analysis. Jason is dedicated to advancing alternative data strategies. His work empowers organizations to harness the potential of difficult data problem spaces, driving innovation across many industries. And you can read more about him and his company at www.simulacra-data.com or at gastrograph.com, where he still serves as a board member for Gastrograph. Well, today I have Jason Cohen and Gerry Schweitzer. Gerry and Jason are co-founders of Simulacra Synthetic Data Studio. We're going to get into what that means and maybe where the name comes from. But Jason and Gerry, welcome. Great to have you here, and looking forward to talking. Maybe you can just start by introducing yourselves and what you're up to, and a little bit about what you're doing.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for having us on. I'm Jason, founder CEO of Simulacra Synthetic Data Studio. Before this, I was founder and CEO of Gastrograph AI for 10 years, one of the leading sensory AI companies, right alongside FlavorWiki. And before that, I was a professional tea taster. I ran the Tea Institute at Penn State, which was an interdisciplinary tea research institute at Penn State University. That's exactly as popular as it sounds.
Well, we can talk a little bit more about that. I'm sure that people are interested. Gerry, how about you? What's about your background?
Yeah, hi, Daniel. Yeah, Jason and we've known each other since 2016. Jason had a company which was an AI-powered company at the time named Gastrograph AI that was in Techstars, in a cycle in Techstars, and I was a mentor for him. And we've stayed very close ever since, and we've worked together on this and built this into something I think is really, really unique. You'll find out about it in a couple seconds. But my whole career has been basically in strategic planning for communications, advertising. Worked with a lot of different international agencies. I was an executive vice president at Gray and Bates, and started my career in Paris, France. And now I'm on a Zoom call.
Awesome. Yeah, I always like to ask people where they're calling from. I know Jason's in New York. Are you also in New York, or where are you based?
No, I'm actually in Florida, near Boca Raton.
Nicer weather at least. Great, fantastic.
Yeah,
Gerry always leaves the
little
two
chilly
best parts
today.
of his background out. Gerry has more to brag about than he lets on, but he played pro baseball in Paris, and he sold the company to Bacardi. Why don't you talk a little bit about those two things, Gerry?
Right. Yeah. Well, playing baseball in Paris isn't really that great of an accolade because baseball in Paris, there's not that many people playing baseball in Paris. But yes, no, we did have a team, and it was a lot of fun traveling around playing other baseball aficionados in Europe. I created a company. I co-founded a company called Leblon Cachaça, which is a Brazilian spirit, and it's used to make a cocktail, their national cocktail called the caipirinha, which means little country girl. And then we sold it to Bacardi. Yeah.
Oh,
so
very
cool. It was interesting. Yeah. I like to tell people I'm really 25 years old, but because of the spirits industry, I age in dog years. So.
Yeah. I mean, also interesting. Did you have an affiliation to Brazil that made you?
My partner spent 3 years running Unilever in Brazil and is married to a Brazilian. So that was impetus enough, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. That's super cool. Very interesting. Well, great to have you guys here. So I guess we can start off by just talking a little bit about what you're doing at your current venture. Jason, I definitely do know Gastrograph, although I have to say I don't know exactly how Gastrograph works. I think out of like courtesy in the professional space, I don't, you guys are doing your thing and we do ours, but certainly have known about you and seen you in the industry all over the place. And Interested to see what you think is the next thing going on, which I presume is what you're working on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, so Gastrograph is an amazing company. I'm still on the board. I'm still a strong supporter of that technology. The thing about Gastrograph, right, is Gastrograph is a proprietary data play. So Gastrograph works because it has spent millions of dollars and the last more than a decade collecting global data sets on perception and preference of food and beverage products. So it has a team that cycles the world. Say it lands in Paris and will recruit 100-something people, taste 80 to 100 on-market CPG products over 5 days or so, and then shut that panel down and move on and do it again. And that has been operating continuously since about 2018. So it's built up the world's largest data set of sensory profiles of on-market products. And when we started that, when I proposed that first in 2016 and really understood what it was going to take to achieve that, we got laughed out of the room, right? Investors are like, "You're going to do what?" Right? Even CPG companies were like, "Well, we're going to profile the global flavor landscape." We're just like, what, why? What, how exactly will that help us? Right. And part of it was, back when we were first pitching this 2016, when we started doing this in 2018, we didn't have the language to describe what it was we're doing. Now, if we were to pitch this, we would say we are building a global foundation model for flavor, right? That has unique properties of scale that's going to allow us in order to pull information from different places, just like any of these contemporary new generative AI algorithms and capabilities can do. But we didn't have that language. And so people thought that we were crazy. And in truth, we were a bit crazy because, this predates all of this idea of building foundation models. So it was by luck and painful experiences throughout the entire team and the entire decade that company, thrived and survived. And continues to do so, right? It still has the best data set. It has algorithms that can only be built on a data set of that size. And I think that's an amazing thing that we built. But about 2 years ago, I stepped up to a board role there because it was becoming increasingly clear to me that generative AI was going to change what's possible to achieve in consumer research. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to take all of this prior data, any major CPG company, any major market research company, branding company, anyone who has a service product, right, or consumers already has consumer research and market research that's relevant to them. These companies, any enterprise company, has been doing consumer and market research for, at least a decade, probably longer, and they have interesting and available data. The problem with that data is that more than half the time, it's not predictive of anything, right? So you run some experiment and you say, we cannot reject the null hypothesis. We cannot say that this product is better than our competitor. We cannot say that this prototype is better than our current market product. We cannot say that, Wegmanos are better than Oreos or whatever it is, right? So you can't reject the null. So you don't actually know what research is going to be statistically significant and going to come out with positive outcomes. We've seen a bifurcation and a fracturing of the market. So people are targeting smaller and smaller cohorts. Everyone expects to have a product that's built for them, right? So that's why now when you go up to, into a supermarket, there's, the kombucha is a little passé at this point, but the wall of different flavors of kombucha. And this is why there's a wall of different flavors of beef jerky, and there's a wall of different flavors of chips. And everyone's like, well, why does Korea get the best flavored chips? Why can't we get gochujang chips, right? And it's this idea that everyone will have a product that's for them. And so you're targeting actually smaller markets and more niche markets. But the problem is that the research is just as expensive. And so companies are responding to this by doing less research. And so the idea behind Simulacra is that you can actually take all of this prior research and you can use generative AI to ask, very simply, to ask for what you want. If you want a product that has higher liking, put in your prior research and tell the AI, show me a data set where this product achieves higher liking scores. If you want to know how the product will do with men versus women, you can say, show me only men, show me only women. If you want to see a scenario where you have non-users, women in their 30s who like the product, right? So a new target, a new entry point. You simply ask for that, and the AI will tell you whether or not that's possible, and it'll generate for you a data set that maximizes the likelihood of that outcome. And so we think of this as actually turning consumer and market research on its head, going from this space where you need to run these experiments and build up predictive models and you're targeting one outcome variable, to this other much more exploratory methodology where you're just able to interact with the data and receive back a full data set that models your scenario, that achieves your desired results. And yeah, that was a lot, but that's the idea.
And is the base data set coming from the client, or because when I read your website, it also mentioned something about, I think you called it, maybe was it simulated or synthetic data as well, where you
Yeah.
were actually doing some sort of process around existing data sets to create, maybe to expand it and make it more nuanced. I mean, I think that thing is, by the way, I think the problem that you're describing is pretty real amongst, well, I can only speak about the food industry because that's mostly who we deal with. We do deal with some health and wellness companies, but yeah, it's still very focused on like the here and now, right? Like, I mean, I still am shocked by how much companies rely on just the simple, hey, I have a new product. I need to test it in a CLT against the existing competitors to see if it's better. Like, okay, like, I mean, and the cost and the cost and energy of doing that is pretty extreme. But look, that's the way that companies have made decisions historically, and they're comfortable with that. And no one really wants to be sitting at the helm of the business when you make a key decision making process change and then it results in something that it doesn't go well. That's a lot of career risk. So I think that there's a lot of just sort of, we've always done it that way in the industry, and people take time to get comfortable around new ways of doing things. Right. So.
Yeah, so to your point, so the technology, everything that I just described is based on consumers bringing their customers bringing their own data. So any of the prior research, consumer market research that's held by these companies, they put it into the Simulacra platform. Simulacra learns a generative model based on that data, and then synthetically generates new data, integrating new information or scenario models that they request. So instead of building predictive models, supervised predictive models, where you say, predict for me sales, predict for me purchase intent, predict for me X, Y, and Z, you're getting a predictive model where all variables predict all variables. And so you can change any variable and see the cascading effects across the entire data set.
And so how do you explain that to somebody that's never dealt with synthetic information, that's never dealt with those types of simulations before? How does that go?
That's a good question. This new company is only a year old. I wouldn't say that we have it perfectly figured out. I think we're in a nice spot where synthetic data is becoming accepted, right? 2 years ago, if we had walked into a company and said synthetic data, they would have said, no, we only use real data, right? So, but when we started Gastrograph in 2016, we walked into companies and said, artificial intelligence. I literally had a company say to me, what do I need artificial intelligence for? So I have human intelligence. That's what we have employees for, right? And now, obviously, no one would say that. So we think that the adoption curve is likely to be there. And the best way that we've found to communicate the value of synthetic data and show them what works is by linking it to things that they're already aware of and things that companies are already using, right? Companies are already suffering from problems with traditional survey methodologies. They are using weighting, where if you get, an imbalanced sample for your target demographic or your target consumer group, you're going to weight those samples, and maybe not either, depending on the sophistication of the company and the way the company operates. It might be them, or it might be their panel provider might provide weights, right? But they're going to say, okay, well, we got a 60-40 ratio of men, women, but we actually want a 50-50. So either we're going to weight women higher and downweight men, or we're going to do rejection sampling, or we're going to throw out data. You should never throw out data, right? So, so maybe, hopefully, they're using weighting. But then they say, actually, we have a wrong balance of married versus unmarried, and the wrong balance of married men versus unmarried
Yep.
married women versus unmarried women. Now you're doing multivariate weighting, and multivariate weighting is bluntly probably wrong. Almost certainly there is not a linear relationship that you can just simply interpolate between those 2 points and get an accurate weight. And so, companies are already experiencing this and they're already doing this. And so Simulacra offers a better way. You can simply inject new information into the generative function to get back the data set that you need. So that's one. And the second thing is, when you talk about scenario modelings, this is something that companies really struggle to do, right? Scenario modeling generally requires them to go to their data science team or their analytics team and set up a specific custom scenario, and then to run those things, and maybe they get back an Excel spreadsheet, and maybe they get back a nice, hopefully, dashboard in Tableau or something that allows them to run it. But by solving those two problems together and allowing them to abstract away the problems of sample sizes and base sizes and incidence rates, I think that the value proposition, even if the immediate understanding of synthetic data and the immediate trust of synthetic data is still something that's just in its nascent stages.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like every innovation. I can't say the CPG industry is better or worse or the same as others, but in the sense that the adoption rate is about knowledge. And I think you're right that, 2 years ago, before ChatGPT became the thing, people didn't think that this was such a big deal. And now, of course, everyone wants it, but it doesn't change the ability to provide it versus 2 years ago. It just means that it's more in vogue. Maybe your boss is talking about it now, but which is fine. I mean, that's the way that all this stuff goes, right?
Yeah.
But what do you then think about the need for real data in the future? I mean, yes, I understand how you can make that extrapolation or build models on that extrapolation from these pretty large existing data sets that customers have, and probably going back further in time becomes less valuable. But they have to have a data set. You've got to get it cleaned up. I'm sure there's a fair amount of work you need to do to sort that out. But what about like going forward? Does that make the collection of real data and real panels and real, home use tests and feedback, moot, or does it just change the role of that type of information?
The latter. We're a
Yeah.
complement to research, not a replacement for research. We
Okay.
make the existing research or future research more valuable.
Mm.
Because instead of only being able to identify, say for example, you ran some research, you ran a home use test, and you gave a new product to a bunch of people, and it's not statistically significant. You can't say that it's more well liked, but in your n equals 100 person survey, you have, say, 12 people that loved the product. And right, in traditional research, you couldn't do anything with that. You couldn't say, well, these 12 people, this is not statistically significant, and we don't really know why they clustered together, and we don't know why they liked it, right? Using Simulacra, you can simply run that as a scenario model. You say, show me more of these people and these people who like it. And Simulacra will learn from the entire data set across all of the cohorts and then generate for you a data set that maximizes the probability of that outcome. And then you can say, okay, well, actually, now I see these are higher income earners, and they're more educated, and they are more likely to have complementary other products at home, right? Whatever it is, if it's toothpaste or something, they're more likely to read the label, and they like the health effects on the label. And so you can find that type of resonance and those things where previously that research just would have been a total loss. It would have been no statistics.
Yeah, because it's purpose built, basically, right? Like there's a
Yeah.
mandate, there's a brief, you do that research and you do it, rather than saying, well, look, I did this and I found my answers, but there's like just a bunch of information in the data set that basically you didn't use, right? Because
Exactly.
it wasn't necessary to fulfill your brief.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So like what do you do with all that information? And I think, again, the way that the industry is structured, the way the buying sequence is structured, the way that the brand managers think about their kind of next goal is short term, right? Like they're like, yeah, why would I care about this extraneous research that could be used by the company 10 years from now? That's not my problem. Like my problem is doing what I want to do today. And so I think that's just the behavioral.
And I hope that that's changing. I think it's starting to change a little bit, where companies are starting to become more holistic thinkers about their data, and they're actually data warehousing. We used to joke, like, I still joke, if it used to be in CPG companies that you were lucky if someone could actually find any prior research that you did, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't in an Excel file or an SPSS file on someone's laptop that may or may not still work there, right?
Yeah.
But now companies are becoming much more serious about data warehousing and data labeling and trying to get things into databases. So I think that that's changing.
I'm surprised by how many agencies don't even give raw data. Occasionally, we have people come to us and they say, "Well, we've been doing this with such and such an agency,
and we don't
and
have
we never we're given the raw data." I'm like, he's like, "Yeah, we had to pay extra. we didn't get it."
That
Right?
that's insanity. That's insanity. I can't imagine being willing to do research, pay for research, and not own the raw data. Need to go back to your research provider.
Yeah.
Yeah, if whoever for the companies.
I won't name names. It's happened a handful of times. I can't.
Yeah.
But every time it has happened, it's kind of reminded me of the fact that's not a very it's just not a very high quality service. Anyway, why CPG, right? Like what you're describing probably has applications within lots of product types, right? And lots of commercial categories. Why do this in CPG, right?
Yeah, there's 2.5 answers to that, or 1.5 answers to that. The only half of our business is in CPG, so we're not exclusive to CPG. We also work in ad and media technology. We work in large tech services that do consumer research on their users or the potential users.
Yeah, basically anybody that's ever done any sort of research could sort of use this, what you're
Any
describing,
type of
right?
consumer and market research. But we talk a lot about CPG, and CPG is 50% of the business because Gerry and I both come from a CPG background, and it's just it's something that I'm passionate about, right? And I'm sitting here with my tea set up and cast iron tetsubing and sitting in a full tea room and drinking my nice third wave coffee. So
Yeah.
I don't know, just something that I get excited about, and I like food products and I like flavor. But yeah, Gerry and I come from a background of CPG, and so it's I mean, they're also one of the heaviest spenders on research. I think that's
Huh.
changing. Ad and
I
media.
would think the media industry would be huge. I mean, maybe Gerry knows more about that. I have no background in that myself, but I would think that advertising and media would spend a lot of money on testing their assets. But
And
maybe
they
it's just
do,
simpler
yeah,
to do. I don't
yeah.
know. Yeah,
And they do. I mean, as
yeah,
you said, yeah, media
yeah.
is constantly trying to refine its tools, constantly trying to refine its capabilities of determining the audience, because in many ways that's what they get paid for.
Mm,
And they're always doing things. They're always in the research market, so to speak. They're always fielding research to understand all those things. Plus, they own all these people as a database, and so they can
mm,
field research against them. In the old days, magazines used to do subscriber surveys. So they
mm,
would tell their clients or their advertisers who advertised in the magazines, much like what still goes on today online, what their
mm,
listeners, viewers, readers are doing and what their
mm,
predilections are. And some big fortunes in the media landscape were made on the backs of those kinds of surveys.
mm,
The CPG world is just rife with constant checking, constant in-market surveying, constant mini-market surveying. They're always trying to talk to their consumer to try to understand what's going on and where the preferences are. The problem was who sees, definitely would buys or preferences for purchasing. A lot of times they don't see the other data in the universe because they don't even have the data. They get a
right,
report back from a commissioned
right.
research company. They don't see the other data. The other data, by the way, is the universe in which the consumer is living. And it's always I think it's pretty important to have knowledge as to what's fueling the consumer preference in a given market or a segment. It's always important to understand what the consumers are feeling and doing and thinking, rather than simply know, well, it's 14% definitely would buy.
Yeah,
Well, Gerry, here's
yeah.
an interesting take on Daniel's question. we were saying the research in the media and marketing landscape versus the amount of research done in CPG. But I think about most CPG spend on product development, on consumer preference, on new market entry, those types of things. I think most of that is R&D. But in media, right, it's probably much less, probably what, 20-25% on research, because there's the creative, there's the carrier costs to put the ad in magazines or on cable or on right. And so the actual amount of research that happens, where like response and feedback and stuff, measurement, I feel like the spend is much lower versus the way that research is done in CPG. Is that right? Am I thinking about that right?
I think, yeah, there's definitely different ways that the media companies use research, and they use them both, fairly often. But I think in terms of innovation and product understanding consumer behavior versus that category and that product usage, I think you're right. It's, I think, much more weighted on the side of the CPG company.
It's interesting. I've often wondered, like, what is the total size of the industry and who spends it where and what? And I mean, it's definitely research is a huge industry. It's just I think it's so fragmented and specialized in so many different ways, right?
Yeah.
That I've never been able to get my head around it. I've even talked to like stock analysts about it, and they don't know. They can't really figure it out. I mean, there's some
When,
broad numbers, and you can look at some big companies like Ipsos and Kantar, their revenues, but they're highly diversified companies, what they're doing, right? So
what do you do when investors ask you for TAM of the market?
I don't have any. I don't really have any investors, so
Okay.
so
That's not
I don't. I got past that problem. I mean, we do have one investor, but he didn't care about that. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I would imagine that the research industry's got to be in the 5 to 10 billion range, if not more. But I think you really then
more.
start to think about like what is the type of research that's going on? Is it innovation research? Is it white space? Is it concept? I mean,
Yeah.
I think there's probably a lot of small studies done on new concept ideas, or what does my consumer think of the bathroom in my in my restaurant and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But when it comes to like innovation related research, I think that that's a smaller portion of that. Just because you can also look at the P&L of companies and look at how much they spend from their P&L on innovation. It's usually
Yeah.
pretty small, right?
Although
So
they don't always break it out though.
yeah,
And if you it I don't think that they break it out. Our best estimate, and we usually just say no when come either at Gastrograph or at Simulacra, like
yeah,
is the innovation research market large enough? So like, look, if you don't have experience in this space,
yeah,
if you don't see multi-billion-dollar companies competing to take off a point of market share from each other, like Nielsen's and Ipsos and Kantar,
yeah.
and any of these other research agencies, right? Like it's just not we're not going to be able to educate you in the level of complexity that exists in this market, in that level in that level of detail. You just have to know that this is a gigantic market. But we do know that our best estimate was NPD CPG new product development research was about 13 billion as of 20
Globally,
yeah, globally, as of like
globally.
2020 or so.
Okay.
Um, and it went through some ups and downs. I think COVID changed a little bit, and it was low, and then it was high again. But yeah, it was about 13 billion. So we think that the entire market is probably closer to 100 billion across all research. But
Well, and then there's the other thing about just what does the market look like tomorrow, and in 20 years from now, 30 years from now. I think that certain types of testing only become more expensive, right? Like the
yeah,
price of gasoline is only going up, right? It's
yeah,
it's never going to go down, right?
yeah,
Like, and
yeah,
so like the cost of people's time, particularly in developed markets like the US, is only going up, right? People are not going to all of a sudden decide that they're willing to go to their CLT for half the money they did last year. So the cost of this stuff, which has like real fixed costs, which technology cannot solve, is
yeah,
only going up, right? Like you can't get people there cheaper. You can't make people's time less valuable. So I think that there are certain constraints for which in a world where we're used to seeing efficiencies gained through, different tools and innovations like digital and AI and things like this, there are some core functional logistical problems that technology can't solve, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that that's constantly going to be the cost and speed discussion in the marketplace, right? So yeah, I think that's basically the point. It's like, what does it look like in 20 years? Like how people do this sort of thing. And again, I think it comes down to decision making. Like what you're doing is very new. Then that would be a question, like, do people trust their decisions based on what they're getting from you, or is it another input at this point, right? Like, I mean, there are certain things that many executives have been doing for 30 years that they just know that that's the way I do it, right? Like if I win in a blind taste test, I'm good. Everything's done, right? Because that's been working for them for 25 years and they've had a nice career. Does that really mean that that's the only way to figure that out? I mean, probably it can't logically be, but they're comfortable with that. That's what they want.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
I agree with that.
Anyway, so maybe go back a little bit because I'm actually interested in a little bit about the Gastrograph early days. If you can talk about them now that you're just on the board. So you were in this tea club at Penn State, yeah, or you were running Was that something where they were making money off testing tea at the university, or was it more of a club thing?
Neither. So that started as a research group. I originally went to I started university very young, and so I went to China in 2007. Originally to study politics. Turns out like blonde hair, blue-eyed, bad Chinese doesn't really endear me to talking about the government. So wound up spending all my time in the tea market, getting very deeply into tea. Went to live on a tea plantation the following year during a harvest season, Makabari in India and Darjeeling. And then I went to Penn State originally on a political science fellowship, which I promptly did nothing with. Started a tea research group that, like everything I touched, spiraled out of control, became an interdisciplinary tea research institute called the Tea Institute at Penn State. And so I had 30-something students, 5 fields of study. I did my research originally in sensory science. Did not love in Europe, I've heard. You did sensory science in Europe, or you didn't.
I don't even have a food background. I mean, I studied business. I worked in finance and VC and e-commerce before I did this.
Nice. Okay. Well, yeah, my I don't have a very high opinion of sensory science as it's practiced today. I find it to be highly reliant on frequent statistical hypothesis testing. I find the use of math and its base assumptions to be both overly conservative and highly biased at the same time. And I think that we see that, if the majority of product development, the majority of product testing does not result in successful products, that there's a problem there. So I moved me and all of my research to machine learning and AI. This is in 2009 through 2013 about.
And was there a discipline within the sensory space at Penn State to do that? Because now I think there would be in some sensory programs that people would, or the professorship would be open to that.
At the time, there was not. So I actually had to switch departments and take my research with me, and so I did that. Started working ground up, building models, trying to make sensory predictive for about 4 years. And when things started to work, it became pretty clear that it didn't belong in academia. So we spun it out of the university. And
didn't you work with beer companies for a while doing this?
Yeah. So our very first industry was beer, and we worked a tiny amount with like early pilot customers in craft brewing, but really our first big work was through ZX Ventures, where we were working with InBev, and yeah, the company grew from there. But now beer industry has its ups and downs, but haven't done a lot of beer work in a long time. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Actually, I don't. From later beer companies now are doing non-beer products, so there's a good amount that's going on in that space. but directly working on beer hasn't been a major part of the Gastrograph business for a long time.
Well, it wasn't one of the problems with beer is that you have so much batch variation, right? And so that if you don't get that control right, which is I found logistically difficult to do, right? Unless you're working inside the brewery, I suppose, right?
Yeah, we so that was one of the very first problems that Gastrograph looked at solving was batch to batch variations and beer quality control. I mean, this is going back before the company even officially launched. This was when we were still in the research phase. And it turned out that like basically global beer loss is somewhere around like 3 to 6%, and it's mostly things like broken hoses. And so even if we are able to cut like bad batches, which are pretty rare, down by half, right? So global beer loss was like 3%. It just didn't make a large enough difference at the corporate level for them to invest in it. And I think part of what's interesting about that is when you're talking about like really not craft beer, but large brewing, right? Like global brands. All of that stuff is blended. You're taking multiple batches, multiple runs. You're putting those in 60,000 gallon bright tanks, and then you're just blending to spec. And so the amount of variation that a consumer actually ever experiences is almost is marginal. It's
Right.
not
Particularly the big brands, right? And then you have
yeah.
like gajillions of small brands of beer now too, that's for sure. So,
Yeah, and the small brands have been hurting. The beer market's has been in a contraction for the last 5, 6 years, I think.
yeah, well, unfortunately, it never came to Europe. We don't have all of these fantastic IPA microbrews over here. Like, we still drink the same old Pilsner beers. It came and went. It never impacted us here.
Yeah. Well, American craft brewing is moving in that direction, right? We went through this IPA craze, but now all of the top breweries now in the United States are doing super sessions or doing lagers. Suddenly Czech style side handle taps are becoming all the rage here in the US. So,
Huh. Well,
it's never static. There's always something fun going on. Sour
interesting.
beers obviously have been a thing, but I think that'll continue. There'll be a proliferation, there'll be a mix, and then things will settle out into a new equilibrium.
Mm. So how much sensory work are you doing in your new product? Is,
A little bit. We try to focus. I mean, we obviously, again, I love Gastrograph and I strongly support them. So we don't try to take on things that are directly competitive with them in pure sensory applications. We do things that are sensory adjacent. We do things where, get in spaces the Gastrograph wouldn't play, like QDA and CATA data. That type of product development data, particularly prior professional panel data, where Gastrograph is all about consumer perception and preference, is an area that Simulacra works very well. But I would say the majority of our work is really behavioral. So modeling changes in consumer behavior, modeling consumer acquisitions of preferences, looking at brand resonance, brand intrinsic claims claims and acceptance. And so, yeah, there's we can certainly do sensory applications, but if you want highly targeted, highly demographically stratified work, definitely use Gastrograph. And if you want to run on pre-existing data, or if you want to look at new ways of using professional panel data or mixed panel data, then you could use Simulacra.
Okay. And it's a platform that people license, or they hire you and then you use it? How much transparency do you give to the the simulation and things like that? So.
Full transparency. So they log on to the platform, they upload their own data, they can set their own constraints, they can do their own rebalancing of demographics, they can run crazy scenarios, right? Show me younger, wealthy, unmarried, no children, whatever variables they have in their data, they can set constraints on, and they can run scenario models on. So, optimally, we wouldn't ever even see their data. And in fact, we don't save their data. We run everything in an isolated single tenant container. So we are, as far as we know, one of the only generative AI companies that does not save your data.
No, I think that's smart. Like, you basically put in a container where you wouldn't even be able to take it if you wanted to. That
Nope.
one of my questions was gonna be how much comfort do these companies have around sharing this with you, and how
Yeah.
you get over that, right?
Yeah,
So
that's how we do it. Everything
yeah,
is isolated single tenant container. We don't write their data
sure.
to hard drive. It's held ephemerally in memory. And
Okay.
and that's it. That's,
Yeah.
so we tell them, like, you download your data, save your data set, whatever you generate, because we can't recover it. We can't see it. We can't, we can't, once that container is deleted, there's nothing we can do to get it back.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can imagine you're signing a lot of papers, but I think that, that sort of thing is necessary to put people's minds at ease, I believe.
Yeah.
Otherwise they're never going to get anywhere, right? If they're unwilling to sort of like open up their door a little bit, then they're going to have to do everything internally. And I think that some companies are capable of doing that, perhaps, right? But others just don't have the bandwidth to
Yeah.
move fast enough. So yeah,
Maybe. I think,
yeah,
part of what we see a good amount of adoption on various types of AI stuff. Some companies have said, no, can't put any of our data into ChatGPT or Claude or any of these other LLM technologies. We're not based on LLM technology. We have our own form of generative functions. It's closer to diffusion models. And other companies have created usage policies around it. But I think having that type of really clear, we don't have your data, we don't save your data, we can't read your data, we don't train on your data, right? Makes companies much more comfortable, and even companies that aren't using other forms of generative AI have been able to we just have a very clear written data retention, privacy, and usage policy that says we have absolutely no access to your data.
yeah.
And that,
Yeah,
that goes
I
a
think that's smart. Yeah, and I'm shocked. I've seen some proposals, not proposals, but presentations from some of the bigger, research houses, and they're doing things with AI and sort of like, and they're using all the information from their past studies that they've run for clients, and they must have some clause in their agreements that allows them to do that on an autonomized basis. But it's like, I've
I don't
never met a
know.
company that would let you do that.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
I don't know. I've seen that too, and some of the marketing that's going on by the big research companies. And
yeah.
I think that there's a room and role for LLMs and some of these large foundation models to play. But I also think that there's right now a bit where we're deep into the hype cycle, where people have unrealistic expectations around what these models, even the fine-tuned and the cross-trained models, are going to be able to do to help with research. Uh,
Mhm.
and I think that that's one of the areas where we're going to see the strongest levels of pushback against generative data. Um, we're entirely we only work on quant data. We don't work on qual research, and so we're not based on LLM technology. And I think that that's really important, because when you think about the text that the data is trained on, and when you think about the types of questions that people are asking LLM based technology to aid in consumer research, if you ask the consumer, right, what they like about Coca-Cola, the consumer might say, oh, it's sweet, it's fizzy, right? They have no idea what they like about Coca-Cola. They don't know that there's various citrus oils and citrus blends that go
Mhm.
into that in order to make that flavor profile. They don't know about the minute amount of vanilla and cola nut and mace and nutmeg and spice
Mhm.
blends that go into it. And they're not identifying anything that a product formulator would be able to take and say, actually, this is what's driving preference here. And so when you try to ask an LLM, which is trained on publicly available data, or even fine-tuned and cross-trained, right, on proprietary data by some of these market research firms, it's not going to come up. It doesn't have the correct statistical distributions. It doesn't have the correct vocabulary. It doesn't have the correct rates of usage of vocabulary. And even if it did, consumers can't identify. They say lemon when they mean lime. They say lime when they mean grapefruit. They say grapefruit when they mean orange, right? And so you're not actually getting statistically valid data. This is the types of things that Gastrograph dealt with all the time, right? That's why we had to go through such hoops to develop the technology in order to be able to accurately identify flavor profiles from consumer data, where the consumers were consistently wrong about what they were
Yeah.
tasting. Um,
Yeah, but you do see a lot of this kind of mass qual approaches, and then using the language model. I mean, this is kind of a thing now, like
yeah,
that the
yeah,
industry seems to be interested in. We don't really do a lot of qual ourselves. We we'd collect some video snippets and things like this, which we find are really additive to a research report, but we would never call them statistically significant, right? At least not in the current form we collected in. Maybe one day, I don't know. But
No.
speaking of data, so is there some like special or better form of research, like going back to the idea of like what does research look like in the future? Do you think with tools like yours being used more, would there be more prescriptive ways to conduct research and build questionnaires that would be better for these types of models? Right.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
We get all sorts of research running through the system, and of the ones that we get to see, sometimes help with the data cleaning and the post process or the pre-processing before it goes into Simulacra. Some research is in great shape. It's really narrow. It's really tight. It's really well designed. And other research is a bit all over the place. People have inserted questions that they thought were important, and the question never got removed, and questions that are, almost irrelevant are in there. And it's hard to know sometimes, what data to keep in. And I think a big area of efficiency gain for companies would be to align on tighter, better designed research, particularly quant research, where what you wind up with is basically a flat file, right? Your rows are observations, your columns are variables, and you don't have these truncated branches where someone said, "Oh, I do use product X," and then you get a different set of questions. Someone says, "I don't use product X," and you get a different set of questions, right? I think that having matching questions, it doesn't have to be complete block design, but having a single set of questions that you're asking all consumers doing your research, I think is more likely in the long run to land on data that's usable for AI models.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you just see so many variants when people try to pack in just more questions into the same research project, and they try to cover too much space, basically.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
and it's fatiguing for the user when you, particularly these list questions, right? Check all that apply is fine, but when you have like rank, the importance of these 10 things in your decision making process. Like if you
yeah,
ask that once, that's fine.
yeah,
When you do the next set of follow-ups on each of these things, you said that price was very important to you, right? Do
yeah,
you think that prices are too high? And then only 10% of your survey respondents are getting that question because only 10% put in price, right, in the thing.
mm,
I think that is damaging to your ability. It looks good in the moment and it looks good to a human reader, but I think it's long term, it's damaging to your ability to build predictive models on the data that you're collecting.
yeah. I agree. I agree. And with that, maybe we can talk a little bit about the future, because building questionnaires and building research is a thing that human beings have to do. Um, what would you say is going to happen to these sort of roles in research science? I know from our own hiring, we really look for people with sensory backgrounds, because we do deal with a lot of sensory, and I think that's a very specialized space. But when it comes to data and data science management, it's actually been more successful to just hire a data scientist and
Yeah.
have them learn about what sensory is all about by participating in the activities of the business. And I don't really find that there's a lot of people out there with these profiles of sort of being ready to go with this new way of working, right? So
I totally agree with that. We
yeah.
and this goes a little bit back to what I had said before. Think about it this way: statistics departments in the United States. I think this is true elsewhere in the United States, but I know the United States academic institutions best. Statistics departments have been hollowed out, right? For all intents and purposes, machine learning and artificial intelligence should have lived in Department of Statistics. It doesn't. It lives in Department of Computer Science. And look at what happens to computer scientists. Computer scientists are grabbing all of the best and the brightest students. They have the highest level of rejection rate. They have the most funding, right? And why did this happen? Well, it was because a lot of statistics departments were allergic to using computers. And it was because a lot of statistics departments were entirely frequentist. And you had, the Bayesian frequentist split. And so all of your frequentist statistical departments really didn't jump on the machine learning bandwagon. And even those that were run by Bayesians didn't adopt computers fast enough. They weren't programmers. And what's happening now to statistics departments, which like I said, really truly have been hollowed out in funding and select choice of students, is happening to sensory science. Sensory science is going to be hollowed out because the best and the brightest aren't going to go there, because they're dug in on these frequentist models. They're dug in on contemporary ways of working, and they're dug in as learning to be service providers. The majority of sensory work in the US turns into, let's go run panels for large companies, right? It's not an area that's seeding its own innovations into the future. And I think that that's really problematic, because there's a lot of work to be done in sensory that could be predictive, that could be groundbreaking. It's one of the hardest areas of science. It's one of the few areas in research where you don't have a verifiable ground truth, right? If you tell,
yeah, it's super abstract, right? Like, so
yeah,
I think you're trying to measure a very abstract, very emotional thing. And yeah, I think in that regard, it's very different than chemistry or physics, where you
yeah,
can see, the results of something, right? So,
yeah,
um, well, I don't know if that speaks well for the future, because if people are going into computer science departments to study these types of topics, by the time they get out of school, they're likely to be tempted by the likes of Apple and Google and things like this with large salaries. And then therefore, again, like, you have a dearth of capable, skill set in different in the industry. All right. So
yeah.
it's actually kind of interesting to think about.
Well, I think the flavor houses are doing pretty good work. I think a lot of, now in AI as well, most of the great work is coming out of industry, not coming out of academia. But I think the flavor houses, which have a real incentive for quantification, have a real incentive for building systems that work, I think that they're doing an okay job. And I think that their adoption curve might be even faster than on the CPG side of saying, we need to be able to build predictive models. We need to be able to synthesize new flavors. We need to be able to use our keys
I
better.
mean, CPG companies they're first and foremost, they're branding and distribution companies, right? And then they look to their suppliers to bring a lot of the science. And I think, I mean, we've seen this in our business. Like, we work with ingredient companies as well. Like, when the successful marriage between supplier and CPG is working well, they really can do a lot together. I think that you're right about that. But more and more of this, you're right. Like, the best people end up in, these high level flavor houses, and because there aren't that many of them, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's just, yeah, and then when I say that, not that there's not good people in the industry, there are. It's just that when you talk about like computer science, data
Yeah,
science,
building model
these
building.
types of capabilities, which is a relatively new field, who's coming out of universities in those areas, they're not necessarily going to the CPG industry. They're going to, startups and
Yeah.
Google and places like this. So self-driving cars and all these other things, which
Yeah.
are a bit
A little
sexier.
more, little more glamorous, a little more obvious.
Yeah. 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 Well, listen, guys, this has been fantastic. Super interesting to talk to both of you. I wish you all the best of good fortune in the new developments, and hope to see you at some sort of industry events at some time in the future. So,
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
all right, thank
Daniel.
you,
You as
guys.
well.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.